It's interesting, isn't it? When we talk about AI, you tend to think of, well, maybe just a couple of big players, right?
The usual suspects.
Yeah, exactly. But there's this report from University 365, and it really makes you rethink Europe's role in all this.
Hmm.
So get this. The European AI market right now is valued at about 60 billion euros.
Wow.
Yeah. And what's more, it's seen some of the fastest growth globally just last year in 2024.
Really? That's significant. I mean, that puts Europe firmly on the map, wouldn't you say? In the AI landscape, I mean.
Yeah, it really does. It does. And to help us unpack all this stuff happening across the continent, we have with us someone who knows this stuff inside out. Anna Connor, she's a professor at University 365 and the lead expert behind their big report. It's called Europe's AI Landscape, March 2025. So, Anna, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, Anna, this report, it's incredibly detailed. So for our listeners who are, trying to get a handle on the big picture here, what are some of the key things that really stood out to you about the current state of AI in Europe? What should we be paying attention to?
Well, I mean, that 60 billion euro
Yeah.
valuation, that's a big number, right? And I think it really underscores, the sheer amount of investment that's happening in AI across Europe.
Yeah.
But I think what's even more interesting, perhaps, is the pace of adoption.
Uh-huh.
The percentage of EU companies that are now using AI jumped from 8% in 2023 to 13.5% in 2024.
Wow. That's a huge jump in just a year.
Yeah, it's a pretty steep increase in a pretty short amount of time. So
Yeah.
that shows you how quickly things are changing.
Absolutely. And it's not just, any old AI, is it? Generative AI seems to be, one of the big drivers here.
Right, yeah. The report says that about 38% of European companies are now using generative AI.
Hmm.
And for those who might not be familiar, generative AI, that's all about AI models that can actually create new content.
Mm-hmm.
So, whether that's text or images or even code,
Hmm.
they're not just analyzing existing data, they're generating new stuff.
That's fascinating.
And I think that high adoption rate, it really shows us that European businesses, they're moving beyond just sort of experimenting with AI. They're actually integrating these powerful tools into their operations.
Yeah, yeah. And it seems like France in particular is playing a big role in all of this, especially with all these generative AI startups.
Oh, absolutely. French startups, they make up like a whopping 17.5% of all generative AI startups in Europe.
Hmm.
So yeah, France it's a real hub for innovation in this really cutting edge area of AI. There's a really vibrant ecosystem there, lots of new ideas and ventures popping up all the time.
Okay, so we've got, Europe's AI scene. It's dynamic, it's growing. France is at the forefront of generative AI. But if we zoom in a little bit, the report highlights, some clear leaders and some countries that are still playing catch up. When it comes to AI adoption, what does that picture look like?
Right. Well, when you look at, who's adopting AI the fastest, Northern Europe, that's where you really see things taking off.
Hmm.
So Denmark, they're leading the pack. They've got an impressive 27.6% of companies using AI.
Wow.
And Sweden is hot on their heels at 25.1%. And what's really interesting about Sweden is that, year on year, their growth has been phenomenal, like almost 15 percentage points.
So they're gaining momentum.
Exactly, yeah. That kind of momentum, it really suggests that, there's something special going on there in terms of, how AI is being integrated. And Belgium is up there too, in the top three, with a 24.7% adoption rate.
Okay, so there's definitely this concentration of AI adoption in the north. And it's not just about who's using it the most, right? Sweden and Switzerland, they're also seen as the best places to actually build AI businesses.
That's right, yeah. If you want to start an AI company, those are the places to be. They've both got these really strong ecosystems,
Yeah.
Top-notch research institutions, government policies that actually
Yeah.
support innovation, and a decent amount of private investment.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, you need that kind of infrastructure, that support, if you're going to build something big, right?
Hmm.
So let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about Western Europe because, that's where we see some of the biggest players, especially when it comes to investment, right?
Absolutely. France, Germany, the UK, they're still attracting the most funding for AI.
Hmm.
In 2024, France was way out in front. Their AI startups pulled in over 1.3 billion euros.
Wow.
Germany came in second with 910 million, and the UK, they got 318 million. Now, what's interesting about Germany is their focus.
Hmm.
Their AI market, it's worth over 10 billion euros, but they're really focused on practical applications, industrial stuff,
Uh-huh.
like using machine learning to make manufacturing more efficient, putting more robots in factories, connecting everything up with the industrial Internet of Things.
So like actual real world
Yeah,
applications.
yeah. And they're making real progress. You see these partnerships forming, between tech companies
Hmm.
and these big industrial giants.
Okay. So France, they're the startup hub. Germany, they're all about applying AI to their industrial base. What about the Netherlands? They had a pretty big win
Oh,
recently, right?
yeah. Data Snipper.
Yeah.
They became, a unicorn in 2024.
And just for our listeners, a unicorn, that
A
means.
unicorn is a startup company that's valued at over $1 billion, so big
A
deal.
big deal, yeah.
And it really shows you, the innovative spirit in the Netherlands. What Data Snipper does is they use AI to automate audits. So it's a really specific application, but it's super important for businesses. It shows how AI is, it's finding its way into all these different parts of the business world.
Yeah. So it's really interesting to see, these different specializations popping up, in different parts of Western Europe. Now, what about Southern and Eastern Europe? How are things progressing there?
Well, they're definitely making strides. They're building up their AI capabilities.
Hmm.
So Italy, for example, their AI market it's estimated to be about 3.5 billion euros, and they're really focusing on things like robotics for manufacturing, data analytics to better understand customers, and AI-powered tools to improve customer engagement.
Uh-huh.
And then in Central and Eastern Europe, Poland is leading the way in attracting funding for AI, and Greece and Croatia, they're also doing well. They've each secured over 100 million euros in investment. In fact, in 2023 and 2024, Central and Eastern European AI ventures, they raised a total of 1.4 billion euros.
Yeah, so the money is flowing in, which is great.
Yeah.
But how does that translate into actual adoption on the ground? Are businesses in those regions actually using AI?
That's where we see a bit of a gap, what they call the digital divide. It's more pronounced in some parts of Europe than others.
Uh-huh.
So Romania, for example, they've got the lowest AI adoption rate, just 3.1%.
Mm.
Poland and Bulgaria, they're a little bit behind too, with rates of 5.9% and 6.5%. So that difference, it really highlights a challenge, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If Europe wants to have a unified AI strategy, something that can compete on a global level,
Hmm.
it needs to make sure that the benefits and the adoption of AI are more evenly spread across the continent.
It's almost like, you need everyone on board, right? If you want to be a real force in the global AI race.
Right.
Now, one of the things that really sets Europe apart is its approach to regulation, particularly the AI Act.
Mhm.
Can you give us, sort of a simple explanation of what this act is all about?
Sure. The AI Act, it's a pretty landmark piece of legislation. It's all about, having a risk-based approach to AI.
Uh-huh.
So basically, the rules that apply to an AI system, they depend on how risky it is.
Okay.
So they've got 4 levels of risk:
Hmm.
minimal, limited, high, and unacceptable.
Okay. So give me some examples, like what would be a minimal risk?
Minimal risk, think of something like a spam filter. It doesn't really impact people's lives in any major way.
Okay.
Limited risk, that might be something like a chatbot.
Gotcha.
High risk, that's where you get into things that could potentially, impact people's safety or their fundamental rights.
Yeah.
So think about AI that's used in medical diagnosis or for recruitment.
Yeah.
And then unacceptable risk, those are the AI systems that are just banned outright. So that would be things like real-time biometric identification,
Hmm.
facial recognition in public spaces. There are a few exceptions, but generally that kind of thing is a no-go.
Okay. So it's a tiered system based on the level of risk. And the implementation of this act, it's happening in stages, right?
Yeah, it's not an overnight change. It's being rolled out gradually. So the first big deadline was February 2nd, 2025.
Hmm.
That's when they banned any AI systems that were considered unacceptable risk. And they also started putting in place some basic requirements for AI literacy,
Oh.
making sure people understand AI.
Okay.
Then on August 1st, 2025, that's when things get a bit more serious. That's when the obligations for providers of general purpose AI models, they come into effect. And that's also when they start being able to penalize companies for not complying.
And those penalties, they're pretty hefty, aren't they?
Yeah, they're not messing around.
Yeah.
If a company is found breaking the rules, especially the rules about those prohibited AI practices, they could be fined up to 35 million euros. or 7% of their global annual turnover, whichever's higher.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a big deterrent. It shows how seriously the EU is taking this.
Yeah. Now, is everyone, are all the EU countries, are they all on the same page with this?
Well, that's the thing. The AI Act, it provides a framework, you know.
Hmm.
It's a set of guidelines, but each country, they have some leeway in how they actually implement it.
Mm.
So you've got some differences. For example, in Italy, their national cybersecurity agency, they're the ones in charge of overseeing AI.
Okay.
In Lithuania, it's the Innovation Agency. And Spain, they've set up a whole new agency, the Spanish Artificial Intelligence Supervisory Agency. But a lot of other countries, they're still figuring out their plans.
So it's kind of a patchwork.
Yeah, and that could be a problem,
Yeah.
for businesses that are operating in multiple countries because they're going to have to navigate all these different interpretations and enforcement mechanisms. Yeah, it's complicated.
It is. It shows just how tricky it is to implement something this big across, 27 different countries.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about regulation. Let's talk about investment.
Yeah.
Because the report, it highlights some pretty big initiatives to actually boost Europe's AI capabilities. There's this thing called Invest AI. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Invest AI, that's a huge deal. They announced it back in February 2025. And the goal is to get 200 billion euros, both public and private investment, into AI development and deployment across Europe.
Wow.
Yeah, it's ambitious. And a big part of that is setting up a 20 billion euro fund specifically for building AI gigafactories.
AI gigafactories. That sounds pretty intense. What are those?
Well, the idea is to create these large-scale computing centers, and each one would have something like 100,000 next-generation AI chips.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about, dramatically increasing Europe's computing power because that's what you need to train these increasingly complex AI models. Yeah, because the more powerful these models get, the more computing power you need.
Exactly. And this is going to be crucial for making breakthroughs in all sorts of fields. Medicine, climate science, engineering. And Invest AI, it's a public-private partnership, so the goal is to make these resources available to startups, SMEs, and researchers.
Okay, so it's about democratizing access to this high-level computing power. And these factories, these AI factories, are they going to be spread out across Europe?
Yeah, that's the plan. The European High Performance Computing Joint Undertaking, EuroHPC-JU, they're the ones in charge of this. They provide the infrastructure, the supercomputing infrastructure, and they're co-funding up to half the cost of these projects. So back in December 2024, they selected 7 consortia to host these factories. They're going to be in Finland, Luxembourg, Sweden, Germany, Italy, Spain, and Greece. And then in February 2025, they announced another 10 billion euros in funding for these facilities.
So they're really putting their money where their mouth is.
Yeah, they're serious about this.
Okay, so we've got this big public investment, but what about, private investment? What role does venture capital and private equity play in all of this? Are they fueling the growth of AI companies in Europe?
Oh, yeah. The European startup ecosystem it's very active. There's a lot of venture capital and private equity flowing into AI. But there is a gap, especially when you compare European AI startups to their U.S. counterparts. So in recent funding rounds, European startups, they raised 2.37 billion euros. That's a good chunk of change, but companies like OpenAI and Anthropic in the U.S., they pulled in a massive 14.3 billion.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, it really highlights the need for more investment in Europe. They want to stay competitive on a global level. They need to attract more funding.
Yeah. So Europe has a solid research base. They've got all these innovative startups, but they need more money to really scale things up.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of research, the report mentions something called the Trillion Parameter Consortium.
Right.
What is that?
So that's part of a bigger initiative from EuroHPC-JU. They basically put out a call for research proposals, specifically focused on international collaboration to develop these really, really large-scale generative AI models. And the Trillion Parameter Consortium it's a key part of that. They're getting up to 1.5 million euros in funding. And the goal is to really push the boundaries of these powerful AI models, especially for scientific applications. And it's not just about making them bigger, it's about figuring out how to train these massive models using high-performance computing resources.
It sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is.
And is there also an emphasis on making sure that these European AI models are developed, in a way that's aligned with European values, with their regulations?
Oh, absolutely. The European Innovation Council, they've launched this challenge called GenAI for EU, and it's specifically about supporting the development of generative AI models that are what they call European value-driven.
Mm.
So they have to be aligned with the AI Act. And the projects that are selected, they get preferential access to the supercomputing resources provided by the AI factories.
Okay, so they're incentivizing the development of AI that fits with their ethical framework.
Yeah, exactly. They want to be at the cutting edge of AI, but they also want to do it in a way that's responsible and ethical.
Yeah, yeah. It's a balancing act, isn't it?
It is.
So we've talked about, the research, the investment, the regulation. How is all of this actually playing out in the real world? How is AI being used across different sectors in Europe?
Well, we're seeing AI being integrated into more and more sectors all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So in government and the public sector, you've got AI being used to streamline things like digital administration, make things more efficient, and also for smart city initiatives to make urban living better.
Mm.
And then in the private sector, the impact is it's already pretty significant. There was a PwC study that found that companies that adopted generative AI in 2024, they saw a 30 to 40% increase in productivity.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, it's a big boost. And this was particularly noticeable in sectors like finance, retail, and information services.
Mm.
AI being used for things like automating customer service, personalizing marketing, optimizing supply chains.
So that's seeing real benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in Germany, they've got that strong industrial base, so you see a lot of investment in AI-powered automation and predictive maintenance in manufacturing.
So give me an example. Like, how would that work in practice?
Okay, so imagine you've got a factory with all these machines, right?
Yeah.
And they all have sensors on them collecting data. Now, an AI system can analyze that data and actually predict when a component might fail.
Mm.
So you can do maintenance before the machine actually breaks down, which saves a lot of money and avoids those unplanned shutdowns.
Yeah, it's like preventative medicine, but for machines. Cool.
Exactly, yeah. And then in France, they're really focusing on AI for digital banking and payment systems.
Yeah.
So, making things more efficient, more secure, and providing a better customer experience.
Okay, so AI is, making businesses more efficient. It's creating new services. It's having a real impact. What about for ordinary people? How is AI affecting, the lives of everyday citizens in Europe?
Well, for individuals, AI is becoming more and more integrated into our daily lives,
Yeah.
through things like personalized services, intelligent assistance, and productivity tools.
Mm.
And the EU's focus on trustworthy AI,
Mm-hmm.
making sure it's ethical. It's really important here
Mm-hmm.
because it means that these applications should be beneficial to people, they should respect privacy, and they should uphold fundamental rights. So the goal is to integrate AI into society in a way that's positive and responsible.
Yeah, to make sure it's a force for good, not something that's harmful.
Exactly.
Now, let's zoom out again. Let's look at, the big picture. How does Europe stack up against, the other big players in the global AI race?
Right. Well, when you look at the rankings, the U.S. and China, they're generally considered the leaders.
Yeah.
And you've got countries like the UK and India. And it's interesting, individual European countries, they don't usually feature in that top tier,
Mm.
which shows you the challenge that Europe faces.
Mm.
They're kind of competing as a bloc rather than as individual nations.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest gaps is in computing power.
Mm-hmm.
So Europe's investing 10 billion euros in these AI factories, which is great.
Yeah.
But the U.S., for example, they've got this project called Stargate, and that's getting something like $500 billion in private investment.
So it's not even close.
Yeah, the scale of investment is it's vastly different.
Okay, so Europe, they've got some catching up to do when it comes to raw computing power. But the report also talks about, some opportunities, some strategic advantages that Europe has. What are those?
Right. Well, the AI Act, that's a big one.
Mm.
They're leading the way in AI regulation, and that could be a real advantage. By setting these clear guidelines for trustworthy AI, European companies, they can become the go-to providers of, ethical and compliant AI systems. And those could become the global standards.
So they're setting the bar.
Yeah, potentially. And then you've got the research base in Europe. It's really strong. They've got all these excellent universities and research institutions and initiatives like the AI factories and Euro HPCJU. Those are really helping to drive innovation. And then, Europe has always been strong in certain sectors like manufacturing, healthcare, and mobility, and that gives them a real opportunity to develop specialized AI solutions for those industries.
So they're playing to their strengths.
Yeah, exactly. So, Germany with their expertise in industrial automation, France with their algorithmic development skills, the Nordic countries with their digital leadership, they can all carve out these niches, and become leaders in specific areas of AI.
Okay, so it's not about, trying to beat the US or China at their own game. It's about finding a different path, a path that focuses on quality, on ethics, on leveraging their existing strengths.
Exactly.
But it's not all smooth sailing, is it? There are still challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There are some big hurdles that Europe needs to overcome if they want to fulfill their potential in AI.
Yeah.
One of the biggest ones is the skills gap.
Uh-huh.
A lot of companies, they just can't find enough people with the right skills in AI and digital technology.
Yeah, we hear that a lot.
Yeah, it's a common problem. And to solve it, they need to do a few things. They need to expand AI education at all levels. They need to create more specialized training programs. They need to help people who are already working to reskill and upskill. And they need to make Europe an attractive place for top AI talent from around the world.
So it's a multifaceted problem.
Yeah, it's not a quick fix.
And then there's the computing power issue.
Right. The AI factories are a step in the right direction, but they need to keep investing, both public and private investment. And they also need to look at, alternative computing solutions. There's some interesting things happening with, projects like NVIDIA's Project Digits, for example.
Hmm.
And then the last thing, and this is really important, they need to make sure that the AI Act is implemented consistently across all the EU member states.
Yeah, because we were talking about that patchwork approach earlier.
Yeah, they need to avoid that.
Yeah.
They need to have clear rules, legal certainty for businesses, and a level playing field.
So it's about coordination. It's about, getting everyone on the same page.
Right.
So looking ahead, to 2030, let's say, what's your overall outlook for Europe's AI landscape?
Well, I think 2026 is going to be a really pivotal year.
Mm.
That's when the AI Act is fully implemented.
Uh-huh.
And that could set a global standard for how AI is developed and used. And, with all the investment that's happening, with all the research, I think Europe has a real chance to become a major force in AI. And not just any kind of AI, but AI that's human-centered, that's ethical, that's sustainable.
So it's about quality over quantity.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we'll see different regions of Europe specializing in different things. So the Nordic countries, they'll probably continue to lead in adoption, and they'll develop really specialized solutions. Western Europe, they'll need to scale up their investment to compete globally, but they can also leverage their industrial strengths. Southern Europe, they can use AI to accelerate their digital transformation. And Eastern Europe, they can build on their technical expertise. But for the EU as a whole, they need to work together. They need to collaborate more, they need to harmonize their regulations, and they need to pool their resources.
So it's a collective effort.
Yeah, it has to be.
So it sounds like, Europe they're not just trying to win the AI race, they're trying to shape it, to create a future where AI is, a force for good in the world.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's not just about technological advancement, it's about responsible innovation that benefits everyone.
Yeah. Anna, this has been a really fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us, and for our listeners who want to dive even deeper into this. Where can they find the full report, and how can they learn more about what University 365 is doing in this area?
Well, the full report, it's called Europe's AI Landscape, March 2025, and it's available on the University 365 website. It's a publication from our research department. And at University 365, we're really committed to understanding these big global trends, and we offer all sorts of educational programs and resources for anyone who wants to learn more about AI. And of course, you can check out our Discussions to Learn series, podcasts like this one, where we dived into all sorts of fascinating topics.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure to include a link to the report and all that other information in the show notes.
Great.
Anna Connard, thanks again for joining us.
It was my pleasure.
And for our listeners, as Europe charts its course in the AI world, with this focus on regulation and ethics, it'll be interesting to see how that influences the global AI landscape. What role will this human-centered approach play in shaping the future of this technology? It's something to think about. And we'll be back next time with another deep dive into a different topic. Thanks for listening.